Online dating is convenient, but it could cause you some psychological harm if you're not careful with it. Nathaniel Wells is a psychologist with North Brisbane Psychologists, and I asked him what some of the harmful impacts of online dating are.
They extend so far beyond, I think, people just trying to find a potential partner, in that there are so many psychological impacts that can be, well, I hate to be jaded about it, but quite harmful to the individual engaging in online dating, whether it's regarding self-esteem or almost having your dopamine receptors fried by too much swiping, and even elements that a lot of people don't expect of grief and loss from getting ghosted or having things not work out the way people expected them to. There's so many impacts that are out there.
Do you see clients now presenting with some of these cases that are just jaded by online dating, and they wish it was 1950 again and they could, meet someone at a milk bar and have a nice traditional romance again?
Yes, and that's not just limited to people who might have even been alive close to 1950. And I have seen people engaging in online dating who have been in their 50s, 60s, even 70s as well. And there's a lot of people who are very jaded with the experience.
Let's go through some of those things that you mentioned in more detail. Grief was one I hadn't thought about before, because we normally associate grief with when someone passes away or something quite significant like that. Can you talk about the way grief occurs in online dating?
It occurs in a multitude of ways, really, but the most probably common one that I've seen in my clinical experience is when it occurs when someone gets ghosted. In that grief is an emotion that we experience when we lose something. And it's most commonly associated with losing a loved one, losing a pet, losing a friend. And a lot of people don't seem to know or acknowledge that there's many things that we lose throughout our lives. And in online dating, when someone gets ghosted, they've lost the expectation of how a relationship might have occurred. And in psychology, we call this something called an ambiguous loss, in that it's a loss that may not reach a conclusive ending. People might not reach the emotional closure that they want. And when you get ghosted, well, it leads the mind to many different possible conclusions. Was I not enough? Did they find someone else? Have they just hopped off the app for a break? We have to fill in the gap ourselves in a lot of ways, and it can be very distressing to individuals and hard for other people to relate to. And it's something I see a lot.
Can you tell us more about the element of self-esteem loss? What happens to your self-esteem in online dating?
Well, a lot of things can happen, and not a lot of them good. For example, in the case of someone becoming ghosted, if say they have vulnerabilities already towards having low self-esteem, if they've got mental health issues in there as well, including vulnerabilities to anxiety or depression, then what we know about these disorders is people tend to interpret neutral events negatively. So where I explained that ghosting could have been caused by many different things, like someone could have just been taking a break off the app, someone with anxiety or depression or just the vulnerabilities for that might interpret it as, well, I must have said something wrong or I mustn't have been good enough, and internalize that. And naturally, I'm sure you can expect how that would impact someone's self-esteem. Start to feel terrible about themselves because this person's just disappeared when they might have been hopeful. And that's just one example.
It's not sounding positive so far. We'll see if there's any redeeming features of it. But one thing I wanted to cover is the superficiality of online dating, because you're judging people purely by their looks initially and very superficial data. Can you comment on what it's doing to us to meet and date people in this way?
It definitely forms a quicker decision-making in the brain, in that people will just make decisions off vanity, essentially. And that's what the apps do reinforce. They get you to put up a certain number of pictures, sometimes some prompts with words in them, but most apps don't have that as a compulsory thing. And where we meet people in person and we make a judgment of their individuality, their character, of what they say, what they do, when we just see a picture on an app, we just switch to very quick decision-making criteria, which in psychology we call heuristics. And we might just make fast decisions based off solely vain reasons.
you're listening to Nathaniel Wells, who's a psychologist at North Brisbane Psychologist, talking about some of the ill effects of online dating and what we should watch out for. Are there any factors about a person that influence what kind of experience they'll have on online dating? You've mentioned if they're prone to anxiety and depression, that can make it a lot harder for them. What about people of different age groups, genders, other kinds of personality types? Can you tell us what might influence the experience that you have when you're online dating?
There's definitely differences between gender in terms of the research points towards males tending to seek more casual experiences through online dating, but not all of them. It's more overrepresented in males than females, for example. In the female demographic, I believe the research points to online dating use and problematic use being used to support self-esteem. So in that demographic, there may be a higher use of just continued swiping in order to bring up self-esteem on the other end of it coming down. So in that way, it can sometimes be positive. But then if it becomes contingent on the app, then we have some problems. Then in terms of age demographics, there's actually a bit of a gap in the research at the moment. So hopefully more of that will come along soon.
Can you switch from your psychology mode to sociology mode? All this impact that we're having through online dating from a psychological perspective on the individual, can you see how that might impact society more broadly as we go to the next generation?
Well, I can only theorise, and I certainly have in the past, in that the availability of potential partners has skyrocketed within, the last 20, 30, 40, even 50 years with the advent of online dating in the last 15 to 20, in that our communities used to be so much smaller and our potential for finding a partner was contained to a much smaller group. And now it's almost like some people become choice crippled in that when you walk into the supermarket and say, I got to buy this thing, but there's 20 different brands of that, it becomes very hard to choose. And from a sociology perspective, perhaps people are waiting longer to find the partner that they're going to stay with because there's so many more people to choose from. And we almost get this grass is greener on the other side idea in our minds of, but someone else might be better for me, so maybe I'll wait.
Do you notice any differences in what people say they want in a partner, such as through online dating, such as, height, wealth, status, job, and what they actually want, what actually makes them happy in a relationship? Is there a gap?
Oh, there's a big gap. There's a very big gap. And often it takes a lot of introspection, a lot of discussion to find the gap itself, in that some people may say they want certain things in a partner, and that may be influenced by societal perspectives of this is what you should want in a partner and this is what a partner should look like for you. Whereas, and this is drawing on my clinical experience in therapy, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, people find that the partner that they want to stick with more aligns with their values as a person rather than some kind of appearance-based thing or something related to activities that a partner might engage in. And that comes at a much deeper level and requires a lot of self-examination to find.
And you think it's quite hard for dating apps to filter for matching values?
Oh, absolutely. It's very, very hard for an app to filter for that. And some of them might claim that they do, but they really don't.
In the interest of not being too gloomy about online dating, Nathaniel, what are some of the positive elements of it?
My absolute favourite positive element to it is that it brings dating to a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise access it. In that, going out and meeting people in a bar, in a milk bar, as the example that you used before, used to be such a daunting experience for people. But now if you can download an app, you can see potential partners and engage with those people so much easier. So people who might have chosen before because they were nervous to go out and talk to new people, they might be able to meet people that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to meet. And if they didn't have friends that they could go out with before, they can meet new people. Even people moving to new cities can now engage and meet new people with much greater ease. So it increases our access and increases the access of people who otherwise might not have been able to date before. And that's a very big positive. So while it comes with its challenges and its negatives, there are actually a lot of positive elements to it as well.
If you are going to be online dating, though, what are some ways to do it safely to minimise some of these psychological risks?
Definitely engage in what I call mindful consumption, in that a dating app is just like any other aspect of social media, but perhaps even more dangerous. where the more we engage with these things, the more harmful they can be and the more addictive they can be. And when I talk about mindful consumption, I talk about when you're using these apps, because it's very hard to not use these apps in the dating landscape of the modern world, make sure that you're checking yourself constantly and going, am I just on this because I'm bored? Am I just on this because I'm constantly swiping for something better? Check in with yourself, make sure you're present, and set time limits for yourself. I'll only do 10 minutes today. And then if you're chatting to someone, chat to them. But make sure you're not engaging in too much swiping.
So if someone has ended a relationship over the New Year's period and they're looking at jumping straight onto the apps, would you suggest jumping on straight away or take a little bit of a break? What should you do after the end of one relationship before you start a new one?
Take some time to yourself and engage with your friends, engage with your other social supports, because a relationship isn't just a romantic relationship. We have many, many relationships in our lives that can be just as fulfilling, if not more. So see your friends, see your family, let them remind you of what a great person you are.
Nathaniel Wells there, psychologist at North Brisbane Psychologist, and I should have clarified a couple of terms with him. He mentioned ghosting, and someone texted in saying, what is ghosting? You lucky soul who texted in that question. Ghosting, here's a definition. When you suddenly disappear from someone you've been on a few dates with by not responding in hopes that they will get the hint. So a stopping of communication, a sudden stopping of communication. Another one I just learned from this website, haunting. You know what haunting is? When someone ghosts or breaks up with you, but keeps watching your Instagram stories or follows you on social media to deliberately remind you that they exist. Modern dating, you're lucky if you did meet in the milk bar. It's getting very complicated.